The email arrived at the exact moment destiny chose to turn the board upside down. Ethan Miles, the man who had just been humiliated on this flight, had become the new owner of the very airline carrying him across America. His phone screen lit up the cold blue light reflecting in his eyes. A single line of text appeared short, but powerful enough to make his heart pound like the roar of the jet engines outside acquisition completed. North Star Technologies now owns 74% of Aurelia Air. Outside the first-class cabin was so silent you could hear the wind sliding along the fuselage. A soft golden light spilled over the polished brown leather seats. Everything, the champagne flutes, the neatly folded napkins, radiated a kind of luxury Ethan once believed he had outgrown. But today it had become the stage for a costly lesson. Arrogance can hide behind the most perfectly knotted tie. Ethan Miles, 43 years old, brown-skinned, his calm expression, carrying the weight of someone who had tasted every form of prejudice. He wasn't born into privilege. He had broken down the doors that once shut in his face. From a poor engineering student in Texas, he became the founder of North Star Technologies, a pioneering company in artificial intelligence. And now, high above the clouds, he was executing the biggest deal of his life, purchasing the entire Aurelia Air, once the pride of America. A multi-billion-dollar acquisition, a flight worth an entire measure of dignity. He sat in seat 2A, the kind reserved for the elite, the kind who thought power was defined by skin tone. His charcoal grey Tom Ford suit fit perfectly across his broad shoulders, his ash-coloured tie knotted with precision. On the table before him, his laptop displayed the merger contract, waiting for his final signature. Ethan took a sip of water, his eyes sweeping across the first-class cabin, 7 passengers, 6 of them. White. He was the only one who stood apart, not because of his colour, but because of the look they gave him, cold, suspicious, dismissive. A blonde flight attendant, Becky Lawson, her smile so well rehearsed it seemed mechanical, passed by without even a glance. On her tray were glasses of golden champagne. She leaned down to serve the man in seat 2B, then skipped Ethan entirely, as if he didn't exist. "Excuse me," Ethan said politely, his deep voice calm but tired. "May I have a glass of champagne?" Becky froze for a split second, her smile still plastered on her face. "We'll be serving our regular passengers first, sir." Then she walked away. From the galley, soft laughter drifted out. Who does he think he is? Probably booked the ticket with reward points. A man's voice, likely her colleague Cole Harper, sneered. "Let him wait. They always want to act like they belong here." Each word, every he and they, landed in Ethan's ears like drops of acid burning slow. He looked up at the cabin ceiling, breathing deeply to stay composed. This wasn't the first time he'd faced such prejudice, but perhaps it would be the last time he let it go unanswered. He opened his laptop, his fingers tapping lightly on the keys. The email still glowed on the screen. The line, "Congratulations, Mr. Miles," resting there quietly, like a secret. They didn't know. None of them knew that the man they were disrespecting was the new owner of this very plane. Across the aisle, Olivia Park, an Asian woman around 38, sat observing quietly. As vice president of investments at Pacific Capital, she had seen scenes like this too many times when contempt was disguised as professionalism. Olivia looked at Becky and Cole, then at Ethan, who sat still and composed. There was something in his eyes that caught her off guard, not anger, but a restraint so intense it was almost chilling. She unlocked her phone and switched on the camera, just in case she whispered. The seatbelt sign lit up, and the captain's voice came on, calm and steady. The cabin settled into a hush, broken only by the sound of pages turning and wine being poured into crystal glasses. Ethan closed his eyes. Memories of childhood surfaced, a boy standing outside an airport fence, watching planes soar into the sky, dreaming not just of flying, but of building them. Today that dream had come true, though tainted by the bitter truth of a world that still hadn't learned how to respect people for who they are. At that very moment across the country, at Aurelia Air's Manhattan headquarters, employees were receiving an email announcement. North Star Technologies has completed the acquisition. Ethan Miles appointed as the new chairman and CEO. Meanwhile, in the air, he was still being treated as if he didn't belong. Becky returned this time, carrying a tray of hot towels. She served each passenger. In turn, her smile restored, flawless again. When she reached Ethan's seat, she paused for half a second, then skipped him and continued down the aisle. The white towel remained on the tray, steam gently rising. Not a word of apology. Ethan inhaled slowly. If this was how the world wanted to test him, so be it. He would let the truth reveal itself. No shouting, no threats, no anger. Just the quiet authority of timing and consequence. Outside the window, a flash of lightning illuminated the grey clouds. The light flared across his face, revealing an expression of cold resolve. In his mind, the plan was already set, every step precise. In 10 minutes, the acquisition would go public. In 20 minutes, the plane would land. In 30 minutes, he would walk out, not as a passenger, but as the man who owned the entire system they worked for. The cabin remained calm. Cole Harper was laughing with another passenger, raising his glass in a toast. Becky leaned close, whispering or just loud enough, "See, they never know their place." Ethan didn't respond. He simply unlocked his phone and tapped the screen once. A message went out. Tanya confirmation complete. See you at JFK. Attached was a screenshot, the email proving ownership. A silent warning. Outside, the sky was turning amber as the sun began to set. The plane glided through the clouds, carrying a secret on the brink of revelation. Inside, Becky and Cole kept chatting. Gerald moved with the easy confidence of someone who thought he was in charge. And Ethan, the only one who knew that their world was about to change forever, sat quietly gazing out the window. The last rays of sunlight brushed his face, glowing like steel in a forge. His heartbeat stayed steady, not from pride, but from certainty. Because sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. It only needs to wait for the right moment to speak. The first-class cabin of Aurelia Air Flight, 417, was wrapped in such quiet, it felt as though every sound had been padded in velvet. But beneath that silence, something foul lingered, the distinct scent of contempt disguised behind polite smiles. Ethan Miles looked up as Becky Lawson returned this time, carrying a tray of drinks for the passengers. The LED lights reflected off her golden hair, giving her the glow of an angel in a pale blue uniform. But her eyes, cold, hollow, and piercing through him, as if he were made of glass, told the real story. "Champagne, sir?" she asked the white man beside him, her voice smooth as silk. "Dom Perignon, 2010. "Right," he replied. "Yes, sir, our finest," Becky said, pouring the wine, leaning just enough to look graceful, her smile perfectly measured. When she straightened, one glass remained on the tray. She stepped past seat 2A, where Ethan sat, and skipped him entirely. No words. No glance. The untouched glass shimmered under the cabin lights, a silent reminder he didn't belong here. From the galley came faint laughter, just loud enough to cut through the hum of the engines. He really thinks he's a businessman, a young male attendant's voice. Cole Harper sneered. Probably used up all his reward points to get here. Typical of their kind. That last word, there needed no explanation. Everyone understood. Ethan heard every syllable. He didn't turn around, only adjusted his tie. On the outside, he looked composed. Inside, his blood was boiling. Not because he hadn't heard words like that before, but because he had grown too used to the silence of those who witnessed it. 4 other passengers had seen the way Becky treated him, yet none spoke up. They looked away, pretending to read, to be busy. Silence, complicity routine. Becky returned again this time, carrying menus. She stopped before each passenger, smiling, bowing politely. But when she reached Ethan, that smile disappeared. "May I see the menu, please?" he asked, his tone calm, low, polite, to the point of icy. Becky raised an eyebrow, her voice laced with feigned surprise. "Oh, sir, our special menu is reserved for priority guests. I'll bring you the standard version." "Priority guests," Ethan repeated slowly. "Yes," she replied, forcing a smile. "Premier members, partner affiliates." Or she paused half a second. "Those who meet the standards of first class." She didn't need to emphasize it. Every word was sharp enough to slice the air like a blade. Ethan looked at her silently, and that silence made Becky step back half a pace. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll wait." Olivia Park, an Asian woman seated diagonally ahead, had seen everything. Her gaze shifted between Ethan and Becky, as though watching a slow-motion scene unfold. She recognized this kind of behavior, sugar-coated polite, yet dripping with venom. Olivia had faced it herself in finance cocktail parties, where people asked where she was really from, conferences, where they mistook her for an assistant instead of a vice president. She unlocked her phone, switched to hidden video mode. She didn't know who the calm, brown-skinned man was, but instinct told her this moment mattered. At the end of the cabin, Gerald Pierce, the flight supervisor, a salt-and-pepper-haired man with rigid posture, stepped forward. "What's going on in seat 2A?" he asked Becky, loud enough for others to hear. "Nothing, sir," she replied sweetly. "This passenger's just being particular. He wants access to the special menu." Gerald glanced at Ethan, his eyes cold and dismissive, as if staring at an imposter. "My friend," he said, with a patronizing tone, "we have clear policies. If you're unhappy, you're free to choose another airline next time." Ethan lifted his head, his voice calm but ringing with steel. "What I'm asking for is simple fairness. I'm not asking for privilege just to be treated like everyone else in this cabin." The air thickened. Gerald smirked. "Don't make this difficult, my friend. I've been flying for 27 years. I know exactly which passengers cause trouble." He turned away. The final words hit like a hammer. Ethan froze, his hands tightening until his knuckles went white. The cabin glowed under soft, golden light, the scent of expensive wine mingling with traces of Chanel perfume. But in Ethan's eyes, it was a velvet-wrapped hell. Every gesture, every glance, every sarcastic word felt like a needle piercing his dignity. He thought of his mother, a night shift nurse whose hands had grown calloused from washing laundry to afford his education. He thought of his first day at Stanford, when someone asked if he'd gotten in on a diversity scholarship. And he thought of the years he'd worked twice as hard, spoken, less smiled at the right moments, just to be seen for his ability, not his color. All of it now converged in this cabin, a miniature stage for the entire world's prejudice. Becky came back, no longer smiling, carrying a tray of water. When she set the glass on Ethan's table, It slipped, spilling across his vest and over his briefcase. The cold water soaked into the fabric, spreading like a fresh wound. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Becky exclaimed, her voice pitched high in fake panic. But the corner of her lips twitched a smile, thin as a knife. Olivia shot up from her seat. "What the hell is wrong with you? I saw that you did it on purpose." Cole rushed over, snapping, "Ma'am, please sit down. This is crew business." "No," Olivia said, her eyes blazing. "This is human business." The entire cabin fell silent. Gerald stepped forward, his face icy. "Miss Park, please return to your seat. Don't make me report to security that you're interfering with flight safety." The threat dropped the temperature of the room. Olivia looked around at the averted eyes, the bowed heads. She understood. She'd been there before. She pulled out a business card and set it on Ethan's table. "Keep this. I saw everything." Gerald turned away, whispering to Cole and Becky. Murmurs spread between the crew, disruptive passenger, threatening non-compliant. The other passengers began to glance at Ethan with caution, some even shaking their heads. The captain switched on the seatbelt sign. But while the white passengers freely stood to use the restroom, every time Ethan shifted in his seat, Cole appeared instantly. "Please sit down, sir. It's for safety regulations. But others sit down, sir. This is your final warning." Ethan sat upright, inhaling deeply. Outside the window, the sky was darkening. A single streak of sunlight fell across his trembling, yet steady hand. He unlocked his phone, turned on the front camera, then dimmed the screen to record everything silently. His heartbeat was steady, each pulse a vow, "I will not be silent anymore." He didn't shout. He didn't react. He simply typed a short note into his phone's memo app. "Meet Tanya at JFK Gate. Activate Plan B." The words were simple as breath, yet they carried the weight of a quiet declaration of war against a system too comfortable with silence. In the first-class cabin, the lights softened. The crew kept chatting and smiling as though nothing had happened. Only one man remained still, eyes fixed on the window where the sky had turned deep indigo. Inside, Ethan, a storm was forming. It hadn't broken yet, but when it did, it would sweep away every lie, every trace of arrogance. The entire first-class cabin seemed frozen after the splash of cold water. No one spoke. Only a faint murmur, sounds like blades slicing into a person's pride, could be heard. The flimsy tissues Becky handed him could not soak up the water, nor could they absorb the chill of humiliation. Ethan looked at the spreading stain on his Tom Ford vest, the fine fabric now clinging and wrinkled like trust crushed in a fist. He looked up and met Becky's eyes. She smiled a sweet smile with something in it as corrosive as acid. No one in the cabin spoke. A few passengers turned away and pretended to sleep. The man in the opposite seat coughed softly, then murmured to his wife, "There, I told you. This kind of trouble always happens." The words reached Ethan's ears cold and thin as a needle. He gave a dry, joyless smile, the smile of someone far too familiar with being misunderstood. In the diagonal row, Olivia Park kept her phone tilted and continued recording. Anger boiled in her chest. She knew the world ran on moments like this, when the wrongdoer was presumed right, and the person in the right was forced into silence to keep the peace. But Ethan Miles was different. He did not stay silent. He simply knew when to speak. Ethan unlocked his phone, activated the audio recorder, and slipped it into his shirt pocket with the tiny camera facing outward. Every movement he made was unhurried, composed to the point of menace. He did not speak or look around. He simply dabbed water from his briefcase, the one holding the acquisition contract for Aurelia Air, worth billions of dollars. The corner of the document was soaked. The glossy pages smudged their ink. If that was an accident, the universe was cruelly precise, and if it was deliberate, Becky had just made a bigger mistake than she realized. Ethan looked out the window. The pale blue light of the cloud layer washed over his face, turning his eyes into two cooling slabs of steel, calm yet dangerous. A soft ding sounded. The seatbelt sign lit up. The captain said briefly, "Due to light turbulence, please remain seated." Becky strode out, scanning the cabin, as if hunting. "Sir," she said, her voice sharp as metal, "you need to sit down immediately." Ethan looked up. Other passengers are still standing. "These are safety regulations, sir." She said, "Sir," the way one might say "this guy." Her voice was higher than usual, deliberately loud enough for others to hear. Gerald Pierce, the supervisor, came forward from the rear, his face flushed with authority. "What is going on here?" "This passenger is not following instructions," Becky answered quickly. Gerald turned to Ethan. "You are disturbing the crew. If you continue, I will have to notify security upon landing." Ethan met his gaze, his voice low and steady, like a lake before a storm. "I only want fair treatment. I have not been disruptive." Gerald gave a thin smile. "I have heard that before. Everyone says it right before the handcuffs go on." Ethan did not answer. He simply exhaled slowly. In his mind, he was counting the beats of the clock, each second, bringing him closer to touchdown, closer to the moment he would expose the entire system. Gerald leaned in, close, his voice low and spiteful. "I have been flying for 27 years, and I decide who stays on my airplane. Do not forget I have the right to call security in mid-air." Then he hammered each word. "Do not force me to do that because you do not know your place." The sentence made the cabin air congeal. Ethan stayed silent, but his chest swelled with feeling not fear, but an anger under discipline. He turned to Olivia. She gave a small nod full of shared understanding. Olivia stood. "Enough," she said loudly. The whole cabin jolted. "What do you think you are doing?" Gerald barked. "I'm telling the truth," she answered, her voice trembling yet firm. "I saw how you treated this passenger. I recorded everything." Becky blanched, and Cole stepped up, raising his voice. "Ma'am, if you do not sit down, you will be penalized for interfering with flight security. Security for whom Olivia shot back. For you or for a passenger's dignity." In that instant, some people looked at her. Others looked away. No one clapped. No one spoke. But one thing was clear. The wall of silence had begun to crack. Gerald bent near to Olivia and whispered coldly, "Miss Park, you are a VIP passenger. Do not jeopardize your flight record." A threat wrapped in silk. Olivia froze for a beat. She knew they could do exactly that. She sat, but her eyes did not lower. Before turning away, she said softly to Ethan, "I will not let them erase this." After Olivia sat, Gerald turned back and spoke quietly with Becky and Cole. Immediately the cabin's glances shifted. A middle-aged man clicked his tongue. Such a nuisance. A young woman shook her head. Why behave like that on a first-class flight? They did not know the truth. They had heard only half the half told by those in uniform. Prejudice spread so easily. It does not need proof, only a whisper loud enough. Ethan stayed still. He could feel eyes settling on him, not eyes of people, but microscopes examining a strange specimen. While Gerald turned away, Ethan slipped his phone into his palm beneath the table. He opened an encryption app and called Tanya Rivera, the vice president of North Star. "Tanya, it is me," he said softly. Her voice came through low and urgent. "Ethan, we are done. The transaction just posted on the SEC system. You are officially the chairman of Aurelia Air. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment of silence. She asked, "Are you all right?" "Your voice sounds off." "I am fine. Just a little wet." Wet, Tanya was startled. "Long story. Meet me at the JFK gate. Bring the legal team." He ended the call and opened his eyes. First class looked the same as before, luxurious and heavy with pretense. But inside him, the world had changed. Gerald returned, planting himself in the aisle. "Listen, Mr. Miles," he said, half warning, half gloating. "I have already notified ground security. When we land, they will come for you. We are obliged to protect passengers from those who pose a threat." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And what is my threatening behavior?" "Not knowing your limits." The answer made Ethan give a small, quiet, dangerous laugh. If a few minutes ago he had been the victim now, he knew he held the advantage. Outside, the light shifted from deep blue to pale silver dawn, beginning to bloom on the horizon. The captain announced, "We are descending, preparing to land in New York." Ethan straightened his tie and gathered his papers. The corner of the contract was still wet, but he no longer cared. More important was the list of employee names he had just typed into his phone. Becky Lawson, first-class attendant. Cole Harper, cabin. Assistant Gerald Pierce, chief supervisor. 3 names, 3 fates, 3 dominoes about to fall. As the airplane pierced the last cloud layer, Ethan closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw every face that had mocked him in his life. The teacher who doubted him, the investor who dismissed him, the colleague who called him a quota hire. All of it dissolved now, leaving only one thought: it is time. The airplane shuddered gently and touched down. Outside, the New York sun rose in blazing color, a light that would scorch those living in the shadows while believing themselves above it. The landing was as soft as a lie, and no one in first class knew that when the wheels kissed the runway at JFK, their fates had also shifted forever. The Boeing 787 shuddered lightly and began to slow. Dawn streaked past the windows, gilding Becky's hair and catching the cold glint in Gerald's eyes. Ethan sat still, fastening his vest button, his hands dry and steady, as if he had just finished an ordinary flight. Yet inside something had moved. A machine of power had just come to life. "Thank you for choosing Aurelia Air." Becky's voice flowed through the speakers, sweet as honey, laced with poison. "We wish you a wonderful day." Gerald stepped closer with a half smile. "Stay seated, Mr. Miles. Once all passengers deplane, security will escort you out. It will be quick." "Thank you," Ethan answered lightly. "I also have a few people waiting for me at the gate." Gerald frowned, suspicious, then let out a small laugh. "I hope they know you are in trouble." Ethan smiled. "Oh, trust me, they know better than you think." Passengers began to rise. Louis Vuitton bags and Rimowa suitcases slid from the overhead bins. No one looked at Ethan. They squeezed past, leaving behind a clear aisle, like an invisible boundary between them and him. Olivia Park walked by and paused for a beat. "Are you all right?" Ethan gave a small nod. "Thank you for speaking up." "Do not thank me," she whispered. "Just make sure they never do this to anyone else again." He watched her go with quiet respect. She could have stayed silent like hundreds of others, but she chose to stand, and sometimes a single voice is enough to begin a revolution. The cabin door opened, and the white light of the jet bridge poured in. Gerald folded his arms at the threshold, waving passengers out first. Outside, 2 airport security officers waited, broad-shouldered, stern-faced, dressed in dark uniforms. Have the paperwork ready, Gerald told Becky and Cole, pleased with himself. We will hand over our special guest. Becky chuckled, breathy as wine. I just hope they do not find any more spilled glasses. The three of them laughed. Ethan heard every word. He stayed silent and quietly closed his briefcase. Inside the corner of the documents was still soaked, but centered among them was the ownership confirmation email that had arrived minutes before landing. He tapped his phone. Notification acquisition finalized. His smile edged sharp and thin as a newly honed blade. Security is ready, Gerald said, signaling the officers. Mr. Miles, please come with us, one of them said in a low voice. Ethan nodded, rose and straightened his tie. He took one last look around the cabin, the leather seats, the scent of wine, the contemptuous eyes, all of it, a backdrop for the biggest performance of his life. As he stepped out, Becky murmured just loud enough for him to hear. That is why people like you should not fly first class. Ethan halted for half a second, turned and met her gaze. Thank you for the reminder, he said softly. I will remember it. She smiled, believing she had won. She did not know that those words would end her career only minutes later. Morning air at JFK was cool, the smell of coffee mingling with jet fuel. The two security officers flanked Ethan with formal seriousness. In front of them stood Michael Trent, the current CEO of Aurelia Air. A grey-haired man in a navy suit, face tense yet courteous. What exactly is going on? Michael asked, irritation clipped in his tone. I was told to receive a senior investor, not an escorted passenger. Me okaso hasto. Trent Gerald cut in. This passenger was disruptive, ignored instructions, and harassed the crew. We have full evidence. I recommend taking him for questioning. Michael frowned. On my flight, I want details. Before Gerald could answer, a woman's voice rang out from behind, sharp, cool, and certain. Details, I can provide them. From the far end of the jet bridge, Tanya Rivera, Executive Vice President of North Star Technologies, approached between two attorneys, a black leather case in hand. Her dark hair neatly pinned her gaze as precise as a razor. Hello, Mr. Trent, she said, shaking his hand. I am Tanya Rivera, representing North Star Technologies. Then she turned to Ethan, her voice formal, yet familiar. Mr. Chairman, we should move to the VIP lounge to handle this. The air shattered. Gerald's brows shot up. Becky froze, her smile dying. Chairman Michael repeated, doubtful. Ethan inclined his head. That is right, Michael. I became chairman of Aurelia Air a few minutes before this aircraft touched down. Silence swallowed the corridor. Cole swallowed hard. Becky stepped back. Gerald stood fixed in place. One security officer glanced at the other, not sure what he had just been dragged into. What did you say? Gerald blurted. You are joking, right? Ethan took out his phone and opened the confirmation email, the screen blazing acquisition. Completed Ethan Miles appointed as executive chairman of Aurelia Air. Michael stared at the words, his face blanching. Good Lord, he whispered. Gerald tried to steady his voice. Chairman or not, you still violated flight security rules. Ethan raised an eyebrow, a faint, dangerous smile on his lips. How interesting. You are now threatening your superior, are you not? Tanya signaled the legal team to open the folder. Merger agreement, equity certificates, and appointment resolution, all filed with the United States Securities and Exchange Commission at 9 o'clock this morning, she said, enunciating each word. Mr. Miles is the lawful owner of Aurelia Air. Gerald went still, lips moving without sound. Becky looked around for an ally and found only the cold stare of reality. Cole broke into a sweat and edged backward. Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm, yet resonant like a judge's gavel. In 10 minutes, every major outlet will receive a formal press release. I suggest you choose your words very carefully. Becky opened her mouth, trembling. I did not know if I had known you were. That Ethan cut in voice, hard as steel, is exactly the problem. You respect power, not dignity. Gerald moved to object, but Tanya lifted a hand. Mr. Pierce, every action your crew took has been captured by passengers and on the cockpit recorder. All of it will be submitted to the review board. Olivia Park, still near the door, stepped forward and held up her phone. I have everything. Video, audio, their words. She turned to Ethan. I think the world should see this. He nodded, his eyes softening for an instant. And they will not, because I need revenge, but because those who come after us deserve better. In the charged air of the jet bridge, every role reversed. The man once humiliated, now held the power. The ones who mocked him now stumbled over pleas. Ethan stepped out of the jetway morning light, washing over his face. In the distance, reporters waited, notified that a historic event in aviation was about to unfold. He paused and glanced back at the 3 figures, still rooted to the spot. Thank you, he said evenly. Without today, Aurelia Eyre might never have learned the true meaning of the word service. He turned and walked toward the VIP lounge, where Tanya and the legal team were waiting. Behind him, those 3 remained, standing there, their smiles gone, their futures collapsing in silence. The VIP lounge at JFK blazed with light, clear glass panels, catching the first sun of the day, reflecting a historic unmasking of Aurelia Eyre before dozens of stunned eyes. At one end of the table, Ethan Miles, the vest on his shoulder, still marked by dry water stains, sat upright and composed, as if everything had been arranged long ago. Facing him was Michael Trent, the sitting CEO. His face, drained of color beside him, sat Gerald Pierce. Becky and Cole, 3 people who had yet to grasp that they were seated in the very meeting that would decide their fate. No longer a flight, no longer a first-class cabin. This was a courtroom, without a sentence announced, yet its verdict would admit no appeal. Tanya Rivera set a stack of documents on the table, each sheet sliding across the polished wood with a dry, chill sound. This is the official copy of the acquisition of Aurelia Eyre, she said, clearly signed and publicly filed this morning. Mr. Miles is now the chairman and the largest shareholder of the airline. Becky's mouth fell open. Cole swallowed hard, and Gerald let out a laugh. Arrogance and desperation tangled together. Shareholder or not, what happened on the flight is a small matter. A little misunderstanding, then it blows over. Ethan leaned back, the dark brown of his eyes catching the ceiling lights. A misunderstanding, he repeated, his low voice landing with the weight of a hammer on steel. Then let me help you understand exactly what happened. He gestured to Tanya. She brought the wall-mounted display to life. Footage from Olivia Park's phone filled the screen. The room's noises died instantly. Every gaze locked on the images, Becky passing him by with a strained smile. Cole whispering, probably used up all his points to buy the ticket, Gerald's voice ringing. I decide who stays on my airplane. Every sound, every smile, every use of the word they replayed with ruthless clarity. The color fled from Becky's face. Cole stared at his lap. Gerald, who had laughed loudest in the cabin, was now white as paper, his lips pressed so tight they trembled. When the video ended, the room fell into silence. No one dared breathe too hard. Ethan reclined slightly, his voice unhurried. What you call a misunderstanding is precisely why hundreds of people like me get treated like trash. And today, That misunderstanding is preserved as legal evidence. Tanya spoke, her tone keen as ice. This recording is valid under New York's one-party consent rule. She said then, immediately furthermore, we have at least 5 witnesses ready to testify, including first-class passenger Olivia Park. Michael Trent tilted his head, shame and fear written plainly across his features. My God, if the press gets this. There is no if Michael Ethan cut in. I have already released a statement. In 10 minutes, the entire country will know that these very people disgraced the airline they serve. Gerald shot to his feet, his voice cracking with panic. You cannot do this. I have worked here for 27 years. I know how to handle customers like you, the ones who always play the victim card to demand special treatment. Ethan rose to face him, only a single step between them. No, you do not know how to handle customers. You only know how to sort human beings. He paused, his gaze turning razor-bright, reflecting Gerald back to himself. Which is why today I will teach you the lesson you failed to learn in 27 years, the lesson called respect. The air in the room compressed dense enough to explode. Tanya tapped the next file. During our internal data review, we found that Mr. Pierce arranged preferential treatment for a relative, specifically Miss Lawson, his niece, who advanced into first-class service despite test scores below the required threshold. Becky jolted. No. I be quiet? Gerald hissed. But Tanya did not stop. Furthermore, Mr. Cole Harper, Mr. Pierce's close friend, failed safety training twice and was nevertheless retained. Whenever complaints about discriminatory behavior arose, the entire file disappeared from the system within 48 hours. Who signed the resolution marked, handled, you did, Mr. Pierce. Her voice held steel. Every entry exists in the server logs we mirrored before the deal announcement. Gerald took a step back, sweat pooling on his brow. You people staged this. No, Tanya replied, you staged it. We simply turned on the lights so you could see it. Ethan regarded them, his voice lower, almost gentle. What angers me most is not the insult. It is the confidence with which you believed you would never be held to account. He turned to Michael Trent. Worse still, leadership allowed that culture to live for decades. So today is not about dealing with 3 employees. This is Judgment Day for an entire system. Michael lowered his head, his hand shaking. I will take responsibility. Ethan nodded once. I know, and I will give you a chance to make amends by rebuilding this company under my oversight. Tanya signaled the attorneys to distribute papers. Under Article 8.3 of the Personnel Code and the clause covering conduct that harms corporate reputation, 3 individuals, Gerald Pierce, Becky Lawson, and Cole Harper, are terminated effective immediately. The declaration struck like thunder. Becky burst into tears. Cole went ashen. Gerald stood paralyzed. You cannot do that, he shouted. I have a union. I have employee protections under the law. One of Ethan's attorneys answered evenly. Unions protect workers, not bigots. Ethan walked around the table until he stood before Gerald. Their eyes met 2 worlds, 2 definitions of power. Mr. Pierce, he said slowly, when you poured water on me, you thought you had lowered me. In truth, you poured it on your own mask, and it is melting. Gerald bared his teeth. You think your money can change everything? Ethan met his eyes. No, Gerald. Money cannot. Justice can. Olivia stepped forward and set her phone on the table. I have sent the video to CNN and The Atlantic. They are verifying its legality. By this afternoon, the entire country may know this story. Gerald growled. You have no right, Ethan cut him off. She does. so do the thousands of passengers you treated like trash. Now they will hear the truth as well." Becky sobbed. Cole kept his head down. Michael Trent looked around the room as if watching the empire he had built collapse before his eyes. Ethan gathered the documents and moved towards the door. Before leaving, he paused in the doorway and looked back at the three who still stood, stunned. "You may think I am doing this out of vengeance," he said softly. "But the truth is, I am doing it out of respect. Respect for the passengers who were insulted and could not speak, for the employees who were crushed and forced into silence. Today I am simply speaking for them." He stepped away, his shoes ringing against the marble like the beat of fate. Behind him, Tanya's clear voice closed the meeting with a single line. "The old game is over. From now on, Aurelia Air will learn to fly on dignity, not on prejudice." The door shut. The three, who once thought they held the sky, could hear only the wind moving through the emptiness they had made for themselves. The VIP lounge after the meeting fell breathlessly silent. 3 chairs opposite Ethan now sat empty, holding only the echo of power that had just collapsed. But for Ethan, Miles, the story was far from over. He had not come to teach 3 people a lesson. He had come to change an entire system where arrogance hid behind uniforms and smiles. Tanya, Ethan said, his voice low and decisive, "Prepare the press release. I want the full story out. Not only the racist conduct, but the internal violations we uncovered." Tanya nodded and signaled the legal team to step out. Only Ethan, Gerald, Becky Cole, Michael Trent, and 2 security officers remained. No one spoke. The air was so thick they could hear the second-hand crawl. Ethan rose, noonlight cut through the glass shades and struck his face, making it gleam like newly fractured marble. "The 3 of you have just been terminated," he said, each word falling like a hammer on steel. "And I believe your next journey will not include a return ticket." Becky burst into tears. Her voice cracking, "Mr. Miles, I am sorry, I did not mean to discriminate. You know exactly what you did." Ethan cut in his gaze like a blade. "And the frightening thing is not the act. It is the habit you have grown used to looking down on others without even noticing." Gerald clenched his fists, his face flushing. "You cannot fire me like this. I am the most senior here. I have the right to contact the union. There are laws that protect me." "Do they?" Ethan arched an eyebrow, a cold smile passing his lips. "Then let me remind you, your contract states clearly that any act that harms the airline's reputation is grounds for immediate termination. What is more harmful than the entire country watching you insult a black customer on video?" Gerald fell speechless, then in blind fury shot to his feet and slammed the table. "You think you can destroy me? I have people at the Federal Aviation Administration, friends on the board, 1 phone call, and I will have your airline audited to the bone." Ethan regarded him as if hearing a child's threat. "I hope you call," he replied lightly, "because when they come, they will find what you have buried for years." The words halted. Gerald, anger in his eyes, flickered with fear. "What are you saying?" Tanya stepped forward and set a file on the table. "An internal report from Aurelia Air's engineering department," she said, 37 safety violations logged but never reported to the Federal Aviation Administration. "Every record bears your sign-off, Mr. Pierce." Gerald stared. "That was an internal measure, No, Tanya cut in cold as ice. That is suppression of technical data and a federal violation, and you have just named yourself responsible." Becky exhaled sharply. Cole turned pale. Ethan folded his arms, his eyes hard as a laser. Now do you see why your threats do not worry me? Every wrong is already inside the system. I have simply purchased the system. Gerald trembled, his voice breaking like shattering glass. You cannot, you have trapped me. No one trapped you, Ethan answered with unnerving calm. We are only reading aloud the truth you left on paper. One of the security officers stepped up and set a firm but gentle hand on Gerald's shoulder. Mr. Pierce, please remain calm. Gerald shook him off, eyes bloodshot. You will regret this. I know about sham maintenance. I know about the reports Trent forced me to sign to hide costs. Michael Trent jolted. What every head turned. Gerald laughed wildly, his voice rasping like wind through metal. Oh, now you are worried. I am not the only one with dirty hands. Trent, you ordered the maintenance cuts. You told me, do not report those little things. And now you want to pin it all on me. Tanya began a recording. Ethan did not move. He only said softly, Thank you for the confirmation. Gerald. The sentence cut like a final blade. The room plunged into turmoil. Michael stammered, I only followed cost optimization procedures. Ethan turned his gaze, the calm of a lake after a storm. Procedures do not kill greed. Can and you have just placed yourself behind the risks that thousands of passengers trusted with their lives. The door swung open. A man in a grey suit entered, his voice deep and clear. Apologies for the delay. I am Roger Daniels, an inspector with the Federal Aviation Administration. The room fractured. Ethan nodded slightly, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Tanya handed him a duplicate file. Roger scanned a few pages and frowned. Mr. Pierce, you have just admitted to concealing safety reports, correct? Gerald stammered. I did not intend to. It was only a procedural delay. Delays do not last 7 years, Roger said, cold as ice. You are detained pending further investigation. I will need statements from Ms. Lawson and Mr. Harper as well. Becky sobbed. Cole stood stunned. Gerald collapsed into a chair, clutching his head. I never meant to hurt anyone. Ethan watched without the slightest gloat. There was no joy in this victory, only the fatigue of a man who had seen too much injustice. He turned to Tanya. Prepare the transfer package for the federal investigators. All data on maintenance personnel and the legacy reporting system must be delivered within 24 hours. Understood, she replied. Michael Trent faltered. You are handing everything to the government. You will drag Aurelia into hell. Ethan looked straight at him, firm. No, I am pulling it out of hell. Gerald was led out by 2 Federal Aviation Administration officers. Before he crossed the threshold, he shouted back, You will regret this, Miles. You do not understand how this world works. It is not made for people like you. Ethan did not answer. He only watched with a cool pity reserved for an old guard that mistook power for a permanent shield. When the door closed, Tanya let out a long breath. You just detonated a media nuclear bomb, Ethan. No, he said slowly. We only turned on the lights. A few minutes later, Olivia Park stepped in carrying a cup of coffee. You will need this, she said, setting it gently before him. Ethan smiled. Thank you, but I think you are the one who deserves a break. Not at all, Olivia said, eyes alight. The world needs to see this, not for revenge, but to remind us that justice is not a relic. Ethan nodded. Are you ready for what comes next? She smiled. Always. Beyond the glass, Aurelia's airplanes kept lifting off, each one a silver arrow into a clear sky. No one knew that only hours earlier, one of them had nearly become a symbol of rot kept hidden. Now the light had broken through. Ethan watched them, and spoke like a vow. From today, no one in this company is allowed to climb by prejudice or push others down. With power, Aurelia Air will learn to fly on dignity. The sky outside burned bright, and in that moment, Ethan Miles knew that justice had not only been served, it had just taken flight. The news broke like a violent storm. Less than 6 hours after the meeting at JFK, every social media platform in America exploded with the hashtag Aurelia Air Scandal. Television channels looped footage of 3 crew members being escorted from the airport intercut, with Olivia Park's video showing Becky Lawson coldly refusing to serve a black passenger, and Gerald Pierce threatening to have security remove him. The audience needed no explanation. A few seconds of video were enough to ignite nationwide outrage. The next morning, the Aurelia Air headquarters in Midtown Manhattan was lit up from 5 o'clock. Outside, waves of reporters crowded the steps, microphones pointed toward the glass doors, shouting Ethan Miles's name. Inside, Ethan sat in the conference room on the 52nd floor, the glow of dozens of screens reflecting off his face, each screen broadcasting news stories about Aurelia Air. On one network, a reporter spoke. A black CEO exposes systemic discrimination within the airline he just purchased. Is this America's wake-up call or a calculated act of revenge? Ethan stared quietly. He knew what would come next. Retaliation. At exactly 8 o'clock that morning, Fox American News erupted with a new headline: Gerald Pierce, former chief supervisor of Aurelia Air, claims he was framed by a media trap. He says the new CEO's reaction was excessive and an abuse of power. Beneath it, hundreds of comments appeared. Another white man destroyed by identity politics. This isn't justice, it's revenge. Tanya Rivera switched off the monitor and turned to Ethan. They've started spinning the story. Gerald has hired a public relations firm. They're branding him as the victim of cancel culture. Ethan pressed his lips together, too familiar with the tactic. When the guilty can't deny the facts, they play the victim. At 9:30, the boardroom of Aurelia Air filled with all 12 board members, the air heavy with tension and unease. The first to speak was Douglas Whitaker, the second largest shareholder, his lined face tight with anger. Ethan, you're burning down this company. The stock dropped 18% in 24 hours. Sponsors are pulling out. The press is calling this an airline civil war. Ethan looked at him calmly. Douglas, you're talking about stock prices. I'm talking about dignity. Dignity doesn't keep a company alive, Whitaker snapped. You've acted recklessly, and now we could lose everything, Tanya cut in. Mr. Whitaker, let me remind you that those so-called reckless actions are the reason this airline is under federal investigation. Without Mr. Miles, Aurelia would have collapsed under a safety scandal before anyone even learned of the discrimination. On the main screen, Tanya brought up a financial report, lines of numbers, flashing maintenance costs, slashed over $8 million, funneled through a shell company named Pierce Aviation Services, owned by Gerald's relatives. Whitaker paled. What the hell is this? Ethan answered simply, evidence, and it's already been handed to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI. The room went dead silent. No one spoke of share prices anymore, because they now understood if Ethan hadn't intervened, everything would have been buried with Gerald's corruption. During a brief recess, Tanya took a call. Her voice lowered. They're preparing another strike. Gerald's been released on bail. He's planning to appear on Morning America, claiming you staged the entire story to make yourself look like a hero. Ethan gave a weary smile. They don't realize the more they lie, the more truth leaks out. He walked to the window, gazing over the tangled streets of Manhattan. But this time I won't respond with words. I'll respond with truth. The meeting resumed. Ethan motioned for Tanya to move to the next slide. The screen displayed a chart: 643 discrimination complaints over the past 5 years, 78% dismissed without investigation, 62% linked to flights supervised by Gerald Pierce. A board member whispered, "My God, how long have we let this go on?" Ethan answered slowly, "How long doesn't matter. What matters is what we do next." He pressed another key, revealing the title, Aurelia Air Corporate Culture Reform Plan, Phase 1. The room fell still. Ethan outlined each step: the formation of an independent committee on equality and safety, under third-party oversight, the appointment of Olivia Park as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, mandatory training programs for all employees, public disclosure of all complaint data, with no more internal erasures, and a direct hotline linking employees to the CEO's office. When he finished, Tanya looked around. Now who's opposed? A few eyes darted aside, but no one raised a hand. Douglas Whitaker, who had fought him the hardest, finally spoke. "I can't deny the facts, but Ethan, are you sure the company can survive this media storm?" Ethan met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "We don't survive by avoiding storms, Douglas. We survive by becoming the reason they stop." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. No one argued further. Outside, the world was already shifting. CNN, The Atlantic, and dozens of independent outlets began publishing the evidence Ethan's media team had released: financial records, falsified maintenance logs, and sworn statements from former employees. A fresh headline appeared on the conference screen: "From discrimination to safety scandal. Aurelia Air's new CEO exposes a decade-long fraud." Ethan said nothing, only looked at Tanya, their eyes meeting in a silent understanding. The media war had turned. That night, as he left the building, Ethan stood alone on the rooftop. Manhattan still glowed beneath him, but inside he felt a hollow quiet. He had won a battle, but he knew the war was far from over. When people fear change, they'll do anything to destroy the one who brings it. Tanya approached, handing him a cup of hot coffee. "You holding up?" she asked. Ethan looked out at the skyline, where an Aurelia airplane crossed the moonlit sky. "Just tired," he said, "but I know I have to keep going, because out there, millions of people are still waiting for a place where they'll be treated fairly." He paused, smiled faintly, and his voice drifted like wind. "If it takes weathering a storm to see the real sky, then let it blow." Below the city burned bright, a witness to a new era, one where justice, though delayed, still knows how to find its way home. The news erupted like a violent storm, and less than 6 hours after the board meeting, the entire American social web blazed with the hashtag Aurelia Air Scandal television channels. Looped footage of 3 crew members being escorted from the airport intercut, with Olivia Park's video, in which Becky Lawson calmly refused to serve a black passenger, and Gerald Pierce threatened to have security take him off the plane. The audience needed no narrator. A few seconds of images were enough to ignite millions of furious hearts. The next morning, the Aurelia Air headquarters in Midtown Manhattan was lit from 5 o'clock. Outside, waves of reporters crowded together with microphones aimed at the glass doors, shouting the name Ethan Miles. Inside, Ethan sat in a conference room on the 52nd floor. The glow of electronic screens washing over his face, the light of hundreds of news segments revolving around the name Aurelia Air. One report filled the monitor. A black CEO has just exposed a culture of discrimination inside the very airline he purchased. Is this America's wake-up call, or an act of revenge from the top? Ethan watched in silence. He knew what would come next. Counterattack. At exactly 8 o'clock, Fox American News blasted a headline. Gerald Pierce, former chief supervisor of Aurelia Air, claims he was trapped by the media. He says the new CEO's actions were excessive, and an abuse of power beneath it. Hundreds of comments flowed. Another white man destroyed by identity politics. This is not justice. This is revenge. Tanya Rivera switched off the screen and turned to Ethan. They have begun twisting the story. Gerald has public relations support. They are branding you as a symbol of cancel culture. Ethan pressed his lips, all too familiar with the tactic. When wrongdoers cannot deny the facts, they play the victim. At 9:30, the main boardroom held all 12 directors, the air thick with tension and fear. The first to speak was Douglas Whitaker, the second largest shareholder. His face creased with anger. Ethan, you are burning this company down. The stock is down 18% in 24 hours. Sponsors are threatening to pull out. The press is calling this a civil war in the airline industry. Ethan met his eyes calmly. Douglas, you are talking about share price. I am talking about dignity. Dignity doesn't feed a company. Whitaker snapped. You are acting out of control, and now we risk losing everything. Tanya cut in. Mr. Whitaker, let me remind you that the so-called out-of-control actions are the reason this airline is under federal investigation without Mr. Weferstall. Miles Aurelia might have collapsed under a safety scandal before anyone even learned about the discrimination on the main screen. Tanya pulled up the financial report. A stream of figures appeared. Maintenance costs slashed more than $8 million, routed through a shell company called Skyline Maintenance, owned by relatives of Gerald, under the legal owner, Victor Benson. Whitaker went pale. What on earth is this? Ethan answered crisply. Evidence, and it has all been turned over to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The room went still. No one talked about share price anymore, because they now understood that without Ethan, everything would have been buried with Gerald's crimes. During a short recess, Tanya took a call, her voice lowered. They are preparing a new strike. Gerald has been released on bail. He is planning to appear on Morning America, to claim you staged the entire story, to create a hero image. Ethan gave a weary smile. They do not understand that the more they lie, the more is revealed. He moved to the window and looked over the tangled streets of Manhattan. But this time, I will not respond with words. I will respond with truth. The meeting resumed, and Ethan signaled Tanya to open the next slide. The screen showed a chart. 643 discrimination complaints over 5 years. 78% dismissed without investigation. 62% tied to flights supervised by Gerald Pierce. A director whispered, "My God, how long have we let this exist?" Ethan replied slowly, "How long does not matter. What matters is what we do now." He tapped again, and the next slide appeared. Aurelia Air Corporate Culture Reform Plan. Phase 1, the room fell silent as Ethan laid out the steps. Establish an independent committee on equality and safety. Under third-party oversight, appoint Olivia Park as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. Implement mandatory training for all employees. Publish all complaint data publicly, with no more internal erasures. create a direct hotline that connects straight to the office of the CEO when he finished. Tanya scanned the room. Now who objects? A few glances slid away. No hands rose. Douglas Whitaker, who had fought hardest, finally spoke. I cannot deny the facts, but Ethan, are you sure the company can survive this media storm? Ethan met his gaze, unwavering. We do not survive by dodging storms. Douglas, we survive by becoming the reason they stop the words, drop the room into silence. No one objected. Meanwhile, the world outside was already shifting. CNN. The Atlantic and dozens of independent outlets began posting the files. Ethan's communications team released financial proof, falsified maintenance logs and employee testimony. A fresh headline flashed on the conference display, from discrimination to safety. The new CEO of Aurelia Air exposes a 10-year fraud. Ethan said nothing. He only looked at Tanya, and their eyes met in quiet understanding. The media battle had turned. That night, leaving the building, Ethan stood still on the rooftop. Manhattan still glowed below, yet inside him was a wide hollow. He had won one battle. But he knew the war would be long when people cannot accept change. They try everything to destroy the one who brings it. Tanya approached and handed him a hot coffee. You all right? She asked. Ethan looked out as an Aurelia jet crossed the moonlit sky. Just tired, but I know I have to keep going, because out there, millions of people are still waiting for a place where they will be treated fairly. He paused and smiled softly, his voice drifting like the wind. If we have to endure a storm to see the real sky, then let it blow below the city, shone like a witness to a new era, where justice, though late, still knows how to fly home. 3 weeks later, the Grand Manhattan Hotel glowed under a sea of lights. Hundreds of executives, officials, and investors filled the grand ballroom for the annual gala of the American aviation industry, all waiting to see how the new face of Aurelia Air would make his entrance. Ethan Miles walked in amid murmurs that rippled through the crowd. He wore a black suit and a silver tie, his composure steady, his gaze calm, the look of a man who had walked through a storm without needing to say a word. Tonight there were no accusations, no doubts, only curiosity. How had this man dismantled an empire with nothing but truth? As the orchestra began to play, the doors at the back of the hall burst open. Gerald Pierce, his hair grey and his face hollow, stumbled in. The stench of alcohol hung in the air as his slurred voice echoed, "Do not believe him. He is no hero." The crowd fell silent. Ethan turned, not with anger, but with the stillness of someone who knows the truth will always speak for itself. Gerald wavered, pointing a trembling finger. You destroyed my name, my family, and this industry. Ethan took a few measured steps toward him, his voice deep and clear. No, Gerald, you destroyed it yourself. I simply pulled back the curtain so everyone could see. The words sliced through the whispers like a blade. Gerald let out a bitter laugh, his eyes red. You think you have won? You are just a tool used by the system to clean its own surface. We both know the sky still belongs to us. Ethan met his stare. Us, as in those who believe their blood runs bluer than others. Then tonight, let everyone hear you say that out loud. Gerald roared, drunk and defiant. Yes, I am not sorry for maintaining standards. First class is not for people who do not know their place. The crowd froze. Several phones lifted to record. Ethan said nothing more, because Gerald had just condemned himself. 2 security officers approached quietly and escorted him out of the ballroom. The orchestra shifted to a softer melody. No one clapped yet. The silence roared louder than applause. Ethan turned back to the stage, took the microphone, and spoke his tone low and steady. Justice does not always arrive in applause. Sometimes it comes in silence when a false word falls away like ash. He paused, scanning the hall. Tonight, Aurelia Air is not celebrating victory. We are honoring something simple that no one deserves to be seen as less than another. And if we must burn down a broken system to find that truth, again, I am willing. The entire ballroom rose to its feet. Not for fame, not for spectacle, but for the truth spoken in a human voice. The ceiling lights shimmered, reflecting across Ethan Miles's face, not the face of a conqueror, but of a man who dared to turn humiliation into the conscience of an entire industry. 6 months after the gala night, Aurelia Air's headquarters in New York had transformed beyond recognition. The walls that once displayed portraits of white executives lined up in succession had been replaced by the Wall of Dignity, a gallery honoring employees who had dared to speak out against injustice. Sunlight streamed through the transparent glass panels, illuminating the lobby where the new motto was engraved in steel: "Respect first, always." Ethan Miles stood in the center of the conference room as the new management team presented their report. In just 4 months, said Olivia Park, now the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, internal complaints have dropped by 87%, customer satisfaction has reached record highs, and for the first time, every passenger is served by the same standard. Ethan smiled, not because of the numbers, but because of what he saw in their eyes. Faith had returned. One afternoon, Tanya entered his office with a newspaper in hand. The European Aviation Alliance just passed a policy called the Miles Code, she said, proudly inspired by Aurelia Air. Every airline will now be required to publicly disclose all records of discrimination cases. Ethan looked at the headline and nodded quietly. He didn't respond, only stepped out onto the balcony. Below an Aurelia plane with the new logo, 2 interwoven wings symbolizing unity, was taxiing toward the runway. The sky doesn't belong to anyone. He murmured, it's where everyone has the right to rise. That evening, at the Ethical Leadership Awards, the host called his name. The award for a leader who turned personal tragedy into a cultural revolution, Ethan Miles. The entire hall rose to their feet. Ethan walked to the stage without a written speech. He spoke slowly, each word etched into the air. Justice isn't the sound of a gavel striking in a courtroom. It's in the small decisions we make every day, in how we see others, in how we treat those with less power. I was once just a man denied a glass of champagne on my own flight, but that moment taught me that respect is the only thing that can truly make this world soar. When the ceremony ended, Ethan stepped outside and looked up at the night sky. An Aurelia airplane streaked above, leaving a long trail of light behind it, like a promise written across the heavens. Tanya stood beside him and asked softly, "Do you think the world has really changed?" Ethan smiled gently. "No, Tanya, it's only begun. But at least now the sky has learned to listen to the human voice." The wind brushed through his hair. Somewhere among the stars, the blinking lights of a small airplane shimmered like the heartbeat of a world that had just learned to breathe through justice. From the perspective of an expert in ethical leadership and corporate culture, the journey of Ethan Miles is not just the story of a first-class seat, but a reminder to the entire world that sometimes justice doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins in the moment when an ordinary person dares to say enough. When power is used to lift others up instead of pressing them down, when justice is built on courage instead of fear, that is the moment society truly evolves. Ethan didn't just cleanse an airline, he forced an entire industry to look into its own reflection. If you believe this world needs more people who stand up for what is right, then like this video to spread that message and subscribe to this channel to continue with us on these stories where humanity is tested by prejudice. Before you leave, comment below with the phrase that represents your belief in justice. Keep your dignity.